Member Regional Council, ICSI, Dr. Devashish Nondi, the Senior Director, Institute of Cost and Management Accountants of India, FCS Rupanjana Dev, Practicing Company Secretary and Independent Director, CS Ramaswamy Kalidas, Partner BNP and Associates, and Mr. G.R. Srikanth, Head Legal, Spencer's Retail Limited. Now I would request my senior, Mr. Alok Kumar Chattopadhyay, to deliver the welcome address. Thank you.
Good afternoon. CS Anil Kumar Dubey, Member, Regional Council, ICSI, Eastern Region. CMA, Dr. D.P. Nandi, Senior Director, the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. FCS Supanjana De, Practicing Company Secretary and Independent Director in many organizations. CS Ramaswamy Kalidas, Partner BNP and Associates. G.R. Srikanth, Head Legal, Spencer's Retail Limited. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to welcome you all to this very engaging and enriching session hosted by Indian Chamber of Commerce in association with NFCG. It has been observed that enterprises are aware of the importance of the concept of sustainability to achieve corporate performance in the long term. However, sustainability is not always integrated into individual business processes, especially by SMEs. As many studies have shown, focus on the company's financial results is all prevailing, but many enterprises do not work with sustainability within corporate strategy and management, and neither do they include sustainability in performance measurement and management. But the reporting of sustainable corporate activities is very simple, especially for SMEs. Sustainability should also become an integral part of strategic management and corporate planning. Sustainability could be also defined as a strategy of the process of sustainable development. Corporate sustainability is understood as the ability of a company through its governance practices and market presence to positively influence ecosystems, improving natural resources, reducing pollution levels, etc., etc. And society, supporting local populations, creating employment, etc., and economic development, distributing wealth through dividends, paying fair salaries, respecting supplier payment obligations, etc. In Haryana, corporates are hiring 75% locals in jobs with wage ceiling of Rs 50,000. However, this is under compulsion from state government and not under sustainability practices. Our aim is the latter and not the former. Sustainability can also be perceived as a way when a firm creates value for its shareholders by maximizing positive and minimizing negative effects of environment, social or economic issues. Enterprises should understand how corporate sustainability is constructed in a specific context and how the concept of sustainable development can be applied to the business level and what enterprises should do when they want to become sustainable. For example, efficient use of the organization's resources, managing the expectations of all stakeholders, making its long-term profitability goals compatible with the principles of sustainable development of society, and so on, should become parts of corporate governance activities. When integrating the concept of sustainability, the company should develop management models and strategies that will lead to the creation of social, environmental, and economic values. It is necessary to set up corporate governance which incorporates a positive response to the company's social, economic, and environmental risk and opportunities that have the potential to influence the performance of the organization. individual levels of sustainability should be defined, and the enterprises should know which activities are specific for individual levels. The questions of how to correctly perceive the concept of sustainability and how to implement it in corporate management in accordance with corporate strategy are widely dealt with. It requires A. Integrate sustainability into the business processes management. Sustainability must become an integral part of strategic management and business planning. B. Integrate sustainability into the measurement and performance of management. Quantify the effects of sustainable activities in the financial performance and its impact on the growth of shareholders' value. C. Identify appropriate business performance matrices, identification of social, environmental, and economic indicators that influence the success of an organization. With these few words, I would like to invite CS Anil Kumar Dubey, Member Regional Council, ICSI Eastern Region, to deliver the theme address. Thank you.
Thank you, Alok sir, and to Indian Chamber of Commerce for inviting me on the app topic given to me and my colleagues and professional friend Ramaswamy sir and J.R. Srikanth sir, and welcome sir, namaste to everyone and all the participants friends. And this is the very app topic. We have to go that how the corporates are evolving the day by day, and earlier the kind of the business. If we see the entire theme of today, I find it the extension of the trusteeship principle given by the Mahatma Gandhi ji. How the business in his social sense, he has specified that the commerce without morality. That extension of the morality is we are finding in a different aspects from GRI foundations to CSR, now to the ESG, now to the business reporting and sustainability reporting format. We will discuss that, how the entire mechanism is going on. Earlier, the business was simply for it was thought that the corporates is simply the amalgam of the contractual obligations of the various stakeholders. That was basically the agency value. We call it from agency value to value logic, how the corporate has been going through it and how it will be impacting the society or the country as a whole in the coming time. That is very important. The topic given to me by the organizers are analyzing strategy, performance, risk projections, and service for all the stakeholders through reformed management practice. How it can be done. So there is a lot of reform management practices I will be focusing on where the stakeholders concerned, not just the investors or shareholders, but the word stakeholders have such a wide spectrum where it includes not just the direct beneficiary or like the shareholder, creditors, employees, but even the indirect beneficiary who may have the impact on the environment. Suppose the community is impacted in a good or bad way, both the way with the operations of the corporate, and then it is also coming to the stakeholders and their concerns should be taken by the corporate while designing their business practices. If we go through that, we now have the CSR. There is a lot of talk about the corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility is totally about how we are spending our money. CSR is just completely silent how we are making our money. How we are spending our money is important, no doubt about it, but how we are making our money is more important. Therefore, the extension of the CSR norms has been, now we are talking about the ESG norms, environmental sustainability and governance. And every investor, if they are putting money into the corporates, they are judging the company on this criteria, that is on ESG norms. And there is a well-documented literature available how many companies have been judged. Okay, if any international investors are coming, they are taking the ESG norms are very in particular, and they are judging how the corporate is impacting. That is their business requirement. What will your business model? That is fine. Cash flow is fine. Your bottom line is fine. But your bottom line, creating the impact on the environmental sustainability and governance structure, that is equally important, because people are not going for the quick money, fly by night. They wanted the sustainability of the corporates in a very, very long way. If we go by that, like the 1984, the stakeholders concept. Before that, the stakeholder theory comes in 1984, when it was talked about not just about the direct beneficiary like shareholders or creditors, but there is a wide spectrum of the people or communities who are going to be impacted by the operations of the corporate. In that, if we go that, when the United Nations has decided to Millennium Development Goals, how we are going to have our targets by 2015, and then it is replaced by that was basically the amalgam, because these are applicable to each and every one. No one is left out. Every nation is covered in that. And after the Sustainability Development Goals, and friends, it is very, very interesting to note that how these, because there is a lot of thrust today on non-financial reporting. With the establishment of the GRI in 1997, these are now taking a lot of roots. And if you're going, I will discuss with the new SEBI guidelines, how it is going to impact the Indian corporates with this financial year 2022 and 23 in the form of the BR and SR reporting. That is very, very important, because BR SR reporting is not that much. It is basically taking out the sustainability reportings and what is the sustainable goals are there, and regulators are incorporating in their regulatory reporting structure so that the corporates have to report in equal measure with equal thrust as they report their financial performance. Earlier, entire focus was on the reporting of the authenticity of or audit of the financial reporting. But there was not much talk about the non-financial reporting. But now the paradigm is shifting more and more towards the non-financial reporting aspect, friends. And that is very, very important to understand how it is going that. Friends, SEBI with the Sustainable Development Goals with 17 objectives that as a humanity we have to achieve by 2030, and corporates are being the essential ingredient component of our economic development. They have to follow their business practices keeping in mind of the humanity goals. I call that this SDG. And keeping that, friends, Securities and Exchange Board of India has a mandated. It was for the financial year 2021 to 22, it was an optional, but with the financial year 2022 to 23, it is going to be mandatory for top 1,000 listed companies by market cap. For them, the business reporting and sustainability reporting becomes BRSR becomes a very, very important part of their reporting structure, and companies will be judged on that concept. This concept of business responsibility and sustainability reporting, and there is a lot of actions required. Lot of all the big corporates have to be on their toes to how they are going to report their business operations. How earlier we are talking about the CSR, but now how you can see that how you are making the money, that will be going to capture through your BRSR reporting. There is no financial burden. There is no, but you have to tell the stakeholders with your operations, what is the cost to the ecology, to the environment, to the community at large. These, in the corporates, we have to be introspect. We have to reimagine your business operations. You have to synergize your business practices with the best business practices. And believe sometimes there is a concept that if you're going to follow the good business practices, there is a cost involved into it. But friends, believe that there may be some short-term cost involved with that, because there is a lot of mentality change to your operational change. But once the customer for whom you're working, they have the mindset, they have the trust on you, that my company, which product or services I am using that is a ESG compliant, or they are taking their sustainability responsibility, and they are very particular way, very focused way. That kind of brand value, that kind of the goodwill, and that will result in your cash flow, that is unimaginable. We have, I'm not wanted to take names in India also, or globally also. The corporates are very, very famous for their responsibility standards. And then when we talk the common people, because they have ingrained these standards, and these are not, these are the timeless classics. These are the timeless principles. It is not we are just discovered overnight. Now we have to do that, because without responsibility, without conscience, you cannot run the business. But earlier there was very dependent upon the company to company. If they were to follow it, they were following it, but there was no standard format for reporting or to judge. But now the metrics will be developed with the information coming that, and it will help the regulator also and the corporate also. Both have to work how we can change that. There will be not, I'm expecting much disruption, but there will be the swift changes in the business operations of the companies. That is a very, very much important. So it is a high time. Basically, it is now top 1,000 companies which are going to be this mandatory reporting, but I'm sure these standards will down the line will be applicable to the unlisted companies also and private companies also in the long run. Because if you are running, we cannot escape our responsibility towards to be the sustainable, towards the following the governance structure towards our environment. This is the very, very important things. And these are the lot of principles involved in the business reporting aspect. If you're going particularly talking about the BRSR reporting format, friends, it has incorporated the SDG on one hand, UNGP on other hand, GRI and NGRDC. And these all the best points which are actionable by the corporates that has been incorporated into this format reporting that has been mandated by the SEBI. And I'm sure that these kind of good governance, good structures will place at least India, the kind of the initiative government is taking, the kind of the commitments government has made into the Paris Climate Change Summit. And I'm very, very sure that the government is taking from the small actions to big everywhere. These ESG norms has been taken into the consideration. And I was very happy to read in some report with the NHI where they are mandating that with every contractor, if you're constructing the roads, before that, the plantation alongside the roads have to be mandated. And there, earlier what is happening with their plantation was going on happen, but there was no monitoring. But now it will geostag, proper monitoring, and each contractor has to ensure its viability. If they are not completing that, their funds are going to the block. Everything is going in that way. And as a corporate, as a professionals, we have to advise, we have to be concerned, we have to conscious about these impacts, how it is going to impact our business operations, and how it is going to make a goodwill for our corporates. And I will request you each and everyone to go to these reports and these standards required for the corporates. And I think in the coming years, it is going to be the talk of the corporate world, buzzword everywhere we'll be talking about. So I really thank ICC to keeping these points, topics for the dissemination of and discussions of all. And thank you. And I will be more than willing to hear my co-panelists, co-speakers on their insights on these points. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now, can I request CMA Dr. DP Nondi to deliver his address, please?
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah. Can I share my screen? Is it permissible here?
Please.
Yes.
So hope the screen has been shared, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it is my proud privilege to be a part of this webinar session, and where eminent faculties are present here. I'd like to give my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Alok Kumar Chatterjee and Mr. Rajarshi Ghosh and all the eminent panelists present here. So just now we have heard from Chairman of EIRC, Company Secretary Institute, that regarding this ESG and other norms. So this is a very interesting area that has been defined by Indian Chamber of Commerce, and today we are gathered here to listen and to deliver on these interesting topics on strategy. These are all a very big area: strategy, performance, risk projections, and service for stakeholders through reformed management practice. So what I believe personally that this management practice, it is a very dynamic subject because every time, every day, it is being evolved. Even if you can say in your every walk of your life, in your professional life, in your family life, every day it has been under the reform stage. So always it is being reformed. It is not that today it is a reform management practice, but always it is under some new formation stage. So with this reformed management practices, and what you see that there are two distinct phases we have been here. Say everybody is saying that before this COVID and after this COVID, post COVID. That is why sometimes we have been defining at 1.0, then 2.0, 3.0, and these are the things. Even there are some industry revolution also there, 4.0. So there are so many versions of everything. That means it is ever changing and it is ever evolving. So how we can analyze this strategy performance in the light of this reformed management practices? So basically the sub theme of my today's discussion maybe on relook at ease of doing business, mainly how we can revisit this ease of doing concept to capture transaction costs and other ground costs and conditions. So this is the sub theme of today's discussion. Say this is the concept note for today's discussion, that is sustainability challenges should be addressed simultaneously at the individual, organizational, sectorial and national level, in all the levels. And financial institutions have a systematic impact on the economy and on the function of our societies. So a culture of profit maximization and uncontrolled risk taking, notwithstanding external costs and impacts, contaminates not only the financial system and the economy, but also individual norms of responsibility. So the global financial crisis came in 2008 and followed by this COVID crisis, a serious block for sustainable business. This is a huge challenge for sustainability, for business and corporate governance, which needs to be delved into. So, so on the basis of this background, our discussion will start how we can mitigate all these serious issues on sustainability with the help of these reformed management practices. So in the background, we can say that 2021, we saw India successfully steer its economy into recovery mode despite major pandemic outbreaks in the first half of the year. Although we have been witnessing these things, but we have been capable enough to regain our strength. Living with this COVID-19 is now a strategy for most of the countries, including India. And now you see this war conditions that has been developed. So India has to become sustained under this situation, has to balance all these things, this international scenario. And this is necessary to curb slowdowns, facilitate economic activity and consumption growth after an extended period of uncertainty. However, the strategy will almost certainly be accompanied by technology disruption in every sector of the economy. And you know, everybody of us, we know that there are so many technological disruptions, IT disruptions, and new innovations that has been taken place every time. To cope with these situations, we are the human being, we are the most innovative brains we are having. So with this reformed management practices, every time we are evolving, we are breaking our, we are applying our minds, and we want to go out of this problem. So that's why through research and development, startups, and besides triggering major changes in human resources, eyeing new investments to give a shot in the arm of economic growth, Union Finance Minister Madam Nirmala Sitharaman on February 1, 2022, she has announced plans to increase ease of doing business in the upcoming financial year 2022-23. Presenting the budget, the minister said that there would be a relaxation in compliances in order to transition to trust-based governance. This is very important, trust-based governance. So that is the transition. She also said that in recent years, over 25,000 compliances were reduced and that 1486 union laws have been repealed. So it is one of the major action towards this reform management practices to develop it into trust-based governance. Announcing that the new budget lays the foundation of the Amrit Kal from India at 75 to India at 100. The Ease of Doing Business 2.0 and Ease of Living schemes will be launched. The new phase will be guided by an active involvement of the states, digitization of manual processes and interventions, integration of the central and state level system through IT bridges a single point access for all citizen-centric services and the standardization and removal of overlapping compliances. So it is very important under this reformed regime. Without this kind of reforms in management practices, we cannot sustain a long, as because these practices, these norms and these business practices that has been changed radically during this COVID period, we have been witnessing. And you see, during this COVID period also, many organizations, business organizations, mainly these IT-driven organizations, they have been performing very well. I think they have changed their business practices tremendously as per the need of the hour. And that is the reformed management practices, we can say. With the process of investment easing, the government hopes that the economy, which is struggling due to COVID-19, will be revived. So this may be a panacea for this revival process of the economy to a more powerful economy. India is a very powerful economy, but it has a potential to become more powerful economy. So the finance minister also announced that one nation, one registration, which will be established and will help to the registration anywhere in the country, and that this would help ease of living and also ease of doing business. This is an excellent concept of one nation, one registration, if that can be done. This is also a reformed management practice. Data exchange among all mode operators will be brought on the unified logistic interface platform to enable efficient movement of goods and reduce logistic cost and time, and e-POS passports using futuristic technology that will be rolled out in 2022-23 for the convenience of people's travel. And as a further step to enhance transparency and to reduce delays in payments, the finance minister launched a completely paperless end-to-end online e-bill system for the use by all central ministries for their procurement. This system will enable the suppliers and contractors to submit online their digitally signed bills and claims and track their status from anywhere. So these are all the steps that has been taken by the government or will be taken by the government very soon for ease of doing business. And these are all the reforms measures in the management practices as a whole. So you know that the topic itself says that reform management practices. So I think this management practices may be at the micro level, in the company level, in the organization level, or it will be in the macro level, that is the economy level or the society level, okay, or the national level. So both the cases, these reform measures are very much important. And if you can do something good in this macro level, that has been percolated in the micro level also in the form of many reforms measures. So to reduce the indirect cost of suppliers and work contractors, the use of surety bonds as a substitute for bank guarantee will be made acceptable in government procurements. The finance minister stated this thing. She said also that business such as cold imports may also find this useful. IRDAI has given the framework for issue of surety bonds by insurance companies. Government rules have recently been modernized for the needs of this Amrit Kal. The new rules have benefited from the inputs from various stakeholders. The modernized rules also allow the use of transparent quality criteria besides cost in evaluation of complex tenders. Provisions have been made for payment of 75% of running bills mandatorily within 10 days and for encouraging settlement of disputes through conciliation. So this is another important area, because there are so many litigations, so many cases that has been pending, more than 5 crores of some litigations, and these pending cases are there. So government is thinking seriously how to conciliate these cases, pending things through arbitration and conciliation. Okay, so that speedy movement can be done in terms of ease of doing business and ease of living. So as a part of EODB, Honorable Minister of Finance also proposed a scheme for design-led manufacturing to be launched to build a strong ecosystem for 5G as a part of the production-linked incentive scheme. So this is another important area for ease of doing business. So with this, we have some initiatives taken for this for recent past by the government. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs launched the simplified pro forma for incorporating company electronically, that is the e-form, in place of INC 29. Further, the ministry has also integrated the MCA 21 that we know with the CBDT for the issue of PAN and TAN to a company incorporated using SPIC. Stakeholders submit application for PAN and TAN at the time of submitting applications for incorporation to SPICE. The PAN TAN allotted by Income Tax Department is being affixed on the certificate of incorporation of the company. Stakeholders can apply for DIN through SPICE up to 3 directors. So these are the initiatives already taken by the ministry. After SPICE, MC also launched a new and simplified web-based service, RE when run, reserve unique name for reserving name in place of INC1. This has also removed the requirement to use a digital signature certificate during name reservation. It was another value addition to ease of doing business in India. And further, the ministry also has amended the LLP rules 2009 through limited liability partnership rules 2018, notified on 18/9/2018 and effective from 2nd October 2018. This amendment has introduced run LLP form in place of LLP form 1 for reserving the name and Philip form in place of LLP form 2 for incorporation. So ministry also by notification GSR number 180 dated 6th March 2019 has amended rule 38 subsection 2 of the Companies Incorporation Rules 2014. With the issue of this notification, 0 fee is to be charged by MCA for all incorporation with an authorized capital up to INR 15 lakh. Declaration to be given in SPICE e-form itself in place of affidavit, which was earlier an attachment. So these are few important areas, important steps, reforms, measures that government has been taking continuously. Actually, why I have shown these slides, those who have taken earlier to 2020, that is the before COVID period, what they have been doing and what they are doing in post-COVID period. So it is clear indication that we want a reformed government, a reformed governance, and with reformed management practices, we want to develop a nation which is a totally reformed one and which is for the sustainability for the young generation, so that the future of the next generation will be in a safe hand and will be the economy will be sustainable. Economy will be sustainable for a long period of time, and the society at large will be benefited with these measures, with these reform measures, and these better management practices or reform management practices. So with this, I would like to conclude here. I'd like to listen from the other speakers and want to make myself enrich with their deliveries. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to deliver on this very critical subject, although, And I hope that I have been able to give some light on the topic. Thank you so much for patient hearing.
Thank you very much, sir. Very nice presentation. Now I would request FCS Rupanjana De, practicing company secretary and independent. Sir, please unshare your screen. Dr. Nandi.
Yes. Just a minute. Just a minute. Can you do it from your end? It is just a minute. It is done. Thank you.
Ma'am Rupanjana De, please share your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh, for this opportunity, and I thank everyone at the Indian Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Alok Kumar Chattopadhyay, and Mr. Ghosh once again. And of course, I am also looking forward to listen to my co-speakers from the other sessions. And it was a pleasure listening to my previous two speakers, Anil Kumar Dubey from the Regional Council of ICSI and Mr. D. Nandi from the Institute of Cost Accountants of India. So it was definitely very enlightening, and both of them spoke about many of the things that I intended to say, and it doesn't make sense repeating the same thing, because otherwise it becomes a little boring for the participants. So I just want to ask ICC officials whether they are sharing the PPTs that are being shared here, which would be helpful for the participants. So Mr. Nandi has really prepared a very good presentation, which will be helpful for the participants. So I can skip that part. Anil has spoken in detail about many regulatory, amendments and the corporate law, SEBI regulations, as well as SDGs and sustainability. He has talked in depth about CSR. And Dr. Nandi has done a very good research. He has covered even the MCA very well. So I would like to take a different approach, and it is more of a brainstorming exercise that I would like to do. And I can see that we are running ahead in time. So maybe we close early also, but then, okay, I would like to give some food for thought for the participants. So I have two things, I have divided my discussion into two separate parts. Although my my topic is relook at the ease of doing business from the governance perspective, and which again Anil Dubey and Mr. Nandi has covered to a large extent. So I'm taking another approach. So I'll the two headings under which I'm going to discuss is ethical management, which is very important. It is in my opinion, this is the reformed management practice that I would like to talk about, because this is very important, taking into consideration the varied list of stakeholders a company has. How ethically it deals with all its stakeholders is very important, and how it prioritizes one stakeholder above the over the another one, and this is a continuous process. So this is something that I would like to give as a food for thought, because this is corporate governance. And corporate governance, as there is no standard, there is no specific mandatory compliances that indicate corporate governance. Corporate governance is some sort of benchmarking exercise, which these are the best practices that we achieve when we comply with law, not just in letter but also in spirit. So what I'm going to say the ethical management practices for the benefit of all the stakeholders is something which I feel from the point of view of corporate governance is the ultimate best practices that today's organizations should resort to. And the second heading under which I will discuss is the ease of doing business. Now, ease of doing business, my co-speakers have spoken from the perspective of what we have in India at the moment. I would rather focus on what we don't have in India and how bad it is. Because I think it has to be a 360-degree approach. Program needs to approach a particular theme from a 360-degree perspective. So that is how I'll divide my topic into. And if there are any questions also, I may be able to take at the end of the program. So to start with, to give basic idea about the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India. And there's no doubt about it that India is one of the largest, entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world. Now, there is not much of a thing to be very happy about it, because we have to remember the size of the population, because the size of the population matters. Size does matter, we know. So because we have a very huge population, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is also very huge. But whether it is as huge as it should have been is the question. Now we come to the startup ecosystem in India. That again India is the third largest startup ecosystem in the whole world. And this is good. And once again, at the same time, this is bad also, because we know we are the second most populous country in the world. And probably today we are the most populous country, because it was said that by 2020 India is going to surpass China. So being the most populous country in the world, we are not expected to be third most, third biggest startup ecosystem in the world. We should have been the first, given that India is technologically advanced. Despite its huge population, India is, it's on the path of development. So it's not really an undeveloped country to come as a third largest ecosystem of startup, despite such a huge population. So this is good. It sounds good initially, but it really is not that good. So, as we know, the current government of India has, to boost entrepreneurship, they have done a lot of initiatives like Startup India initiative, Digital India, Make in India, and the Startup Action Plan SAP 2016. So these are some. I'm not going to go into detail into all these, because I have so many heads to discuss. So I just lightly touch upon all of this. So startup, we all know about the Startup India initiative started in 2015, and the Make in India initiative, we all know about it. And we also know the lion with all the screws and nuts and bolts, the logo, that is very catchy logo of Make in India. The Digital India, we all today we are seeing the digitalization of compliances and all. Things have become so easy during the pandemic, such a huge pandemic. Businesses were hit in the beginning, businesses in the sense of the corporate operations, not the manufacturing and all that. So the corporate offices work were not really hit, because the things could be done digitally. We still are doing work from home, and we are now getting used to a digital workspace so easily. So this is one of the things that Digital India has also helped achieve. And of course, Make in India, we know that so many new, new companies and new products, new brands have come up under this Make in India initiative. And Startup India, of course, under Startup India, I'm going to give the number of startups that have been registered under Startup India. It is around 61,000 something. So I'll give the exact number later. So this is a huge number, so to say. But then it's in 7 years, so it comes to about 9,000 per year, which is not bad. Given that startups are basically a step towards entrepreneurship by individuals who were not into business earlier on. So having about 9,000 new startups every year is a great thing. But how long do these startups survive? Now that is important. That depends on the ease of doing business. Now, whether we really have the ease of doing business or not, that again I'm going to discuss later on. We also have many initiatives for the MSMEs. We know that a lot of relaxations have been given for MSMEs, and so they are able to take benefit of that. So that is also another initiative towards ease of doing business. Then we come to simplification and rationalization of compliances, as we have seen in the under the Companies Act, and Mr. Dr. Nandi has dealt with it to some extent. We have had the Companies Amendment Acts back to back, 2017 Companies Amendment Act 2017, then followed by Companies Amendment Act 2019, followed by Companies Amendment Act 2020. So all of these have back to back, brought about some things which made it easier to run businesses from the compliance perspective. We know that criminal provisions were introduced in many sections, including, it's easy to describe this CSR provisions. Take the example of CSR provisions when we talk about criminalization. In the Companies Amendment Act 2017, I think 2019, Companies Amendment Act 2019 brought about the penal provisions for non-compliance of section 135. So that included imprisonment for the company's officers in default who were not compliant for the CSR provisions. So this met with a lot of objections from the stakeholders, the industry, and resulting in the non-implementation of that particular section, which contained that criminalization of penalties have been imposed instead. Now, along with that, rationalization of many compliances have also been made. Many compliances which were irrational or repetitive or unnecessary. So these have been removed. So there's a huge list of those provisions. So there's no point discussing it in this platform under this theme. It will take a separate day to discuss all those. And I would very much like to do that. And I would request ICC officials to, take do a session, a webinar on this rationalization of the company law provisions, and these things which have been done recently. It's a very interesting and very big topic. So this is the background of the ease of doing business that have been done in India so far. And now, what is the worldwide situation of the ease of doing business in India? I'll come to that, but first of all, as I mentioned, I'll talk about reformed management practice from the point of view of ethical decision making. So this is something which I want to give everyone as a food for thought. Now, what is that? Ethical decision making involving prioritization of stakeholders. Now, we know that today we have in Companies Act the stakeholder approach. Earlier, it was a shareholder approach, and shareholder wealth maximization was the only goal of the company, because the shareholders are the ultimate owners of the company. So, but then when corporate governance began to take over the company law scene, then this shareholder was replaced with the concept of stakeholders. Now, if you think from the point of view of a particular company, every individual in an organization is a stakeholder, from a certain type of stakeholder. Now, let's talk about the shareholders. Let's start with the traditional stakeholders, the shareholders, who have always been recognized. Now, shareholders are definitely the stakeholders, but they have always been recognized. Now, who are the others? Let's come to the employees. The employees are definitely stakeholders. Now, what is like all stakeholders have an interest in increasing their value or getting some return or getting some satisfaction from the company. So shareholders are interested in dividend, bonus shares, right shares, and or maybe increased prices of the shares so that they can sell in the market. In case of listed companies and all public limited companies, they can sell their shares, and these are basically investments. So their interest is earning money from the company. Employees, what are their interests? They want, a good job profile, a safe work environment, good pay and benefits, and safe environment and respect from the work. And so that is what the employees as a stakeholder want from the organization. Now we have the government as a stakeholder. Government is looking for good tax earning from a particular company. So if the company makes profit, the government also earns from the company. Now financial institutions and banks, they are looking for the companies to pay them in time, repay their loans, and pay the interest rates from time to time. So that is their interest in the company. They are also the stakeholders. Then we have the community residing around the companies, the factory, or the plant. So they want, they're looking for the community development projects that the company is doing, which in the current scenario is the CSR projects essentially. But earlier it was that the communities wanted the company not to degrade the environment and to give them their right. They had the right to a proper living conditions. So their interest or their satisfaction level from the company came from its operations. If the company was not polluting, or it was not releasing sewage to their living areas and all that. So this is the community's interest in the company. And then we have the suppliers, the customers want the best quality products at the most reasonable time, and suppliers want the best price for their raw materials, for their supplies. So all these are the stakeholders. Now every stakeholder will have, for the stakeholder, its own interest will be supreme. Like for example, let's say for the government, the supreme interest is that the company should make the maximum profit, so that the companies can pay a lot of to the government exchequer in the form of tax. For the shareholders, let's say, not the shareholders, let's compare this with the employees. So if the company makes a huge profit, the employees will expect some benefit in the form of increased salaries or wages, some other benefits from the company. So this to some extent is contradictory to each other. The company has to pay taxes. The company also has to keep its employees happy. Now who should the company prioritize, and to what extent? What should be the schedule of prioritization? So this is where the ethical decision making comes. Prioritizing amongst the shareholders is a very important tool of ethical decision making, because if let's say you are prioritizing just one particular stakeholder all the time, this is not ethical. Like we used to do earlier, when we were prioritizing the shareholders all the time, we were not bothered about the other stakeholders. So now we have so many stakeholders. Now we can prioritize them. Now let's say in a situation that we are now, we are in the midst of a pandemic. We are in the midst of an impending threat of a world war, let's say. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But in such a situation, what should be the biggest priority from the perspective of a company? The company, if the company is a ethical decision maker, the company would probably want to earn more profit and pay to the government exchequers more. The company would also like to pay its employees properly, so that they are not they don't have to bear the brunt of the situation, because now things are very difficult, and we never know when we go inside our homes once again, if the pandemic relapses, or the war situation comes to India also. So we really don't know that. So now everybody, as on date, everybody, all the stakeholders want to make money, so that they keep that money for any unforeseen situation that we have seen. For the 2 years, we have seen such an unforeseen situation. People ran out of money. Even good people became criminals, because they didn't have jobs, they didn't have money. So where do they feed their families, their children from? So they had to commit crime. So now that the things are open in India, offices are working, everything is normal. So now the biggest focus of every individual, every unit, be it individual, be it schools, be it societies, be it companies, government, non-government, everybody wants to do the maximum business possible now, so that they can have their coffers filled up for in case of any unforeseen event. So this uh, this is the priority of everybody now. So what should, from the point of view of a company, what should they do? How should they do the ethical decision making? How should they prioritize from time to time? Now, this they have to see which particular stakeholder is very important. Take a normal situation when we are not in a pandemic, or we are not an impending war or something. So a company launches a new brand, and the company wants this brand to be successful. So at this point, who is the biggest priority of the company? Which stakeholder? Not the shareholders. It's not the shareholders who should be the biggest priority, not the banks, not the creditors, not the government, not the employees. At this moment, the biggest stakeholder for the company will be the consumers, the customers, because they want them to buy more and more of the products and make this brand successful, this new thing successful. Similarly, when there is an IPO of a company, the highest priority is on investors, the shareholders. Also government, because the regulators also have to be assured of all types of compliances. So depending upon the situation and the time, the prioritization of stakeholders of a particular organization changes. Now, how good, how efficient that management is depends on how it can do this reformed management thinking, this ethical decision making, of how to prioritize its shareholders. Now, there is a 2x2 matrix developed by this Rice University, the USA, where they talk about, in the y-axis they put power, and the x-axis they put interest. So stakeholders, there are four types of stakeholders. Since it's a 2x2 matrix, there are four types of stakeholders. A stakeholder with less power and less interest, a stakeholder with less power but more interest, a stakeholder with more power and more interest, and a stakeholder with more power but less interest. So the highest, when you put these stakeholders, if you are not able to understand who should be your priority list at this point of time, you have to draw this matrix and see who falls in this more power, more interest cell, so that you can prioritize that particular stakeholder. So this is something I would have loved to share this, share a PPT, which may be based on the discussion now. I'll be sharing within 1 or 2 days, and Mr. Ghosh may be able to take this from me and share with all the participants, and where I'll be sharing the matrix and everything else that I'm discussing. Now, this particular matrix throws light on some important things, that not all stakeholders have equal influence. For example, let's say government, the regulators, obviously they have much more influence than let's say the employees. Or in case of a very big organization where there are chances of lockout and strikes and all that, the employees may have a very good influence, more than the community. So some stakeholders have more power, more interest, some have less interest. Let's say for the community, are they interested whether the company is a success in an IPO or not? They are not interested. So they are also not very powerful. So obviously, because the community has less interest, community as a stakeholder has less interest and also less power, it implies that the community is always in the lowest level of priority for any organization. That is exactly why we have CSR as a mandatory compliance today. because that is lending a voice to this weak stakeholder, the community, by making it mandatory, by making compliance mandatory for the companies. Now, no organization can completely ignore this matrix. As per this matrix, you have to put every stakeholder into one cell, one or more cell, not one or more cell. There can be one or more stakeholders in a particular cell, but one particular stakeholder can be only in a one cell. So you cannot ignore anyone. It can be in the low priority list, but it cannot be completely ignored. Then it cannot be, you cannot give priority to everybody at the same time. At a particular point of time, someone is at the top priority, someone is at the lowest priority. That, as I discussed earlier, giving an example of the IPO and a launching of the brand new product. Now, all these this matrix is very helpful for the management, for decision making as to how to deal with the stakeholders. Now, if an organization is not, the management of an organization is not efficient enough to prioritize the stakeholders, and they do it on other basis, like which are flawed or inaccurate or incomplete information, then the prioritization is destined to be flawed, right? So in that case, let's say pre-production, when the company is going to launch a product, but before that product it has to produce that product, then the employees, the workforce is very important. But then the company forgets that, and the company thinks that we're going to launch a product, let's give the full priority to our consumers. So if in doing so, the workforce will be neglected, but it is that their time, it is their priority time. If they are not able to produce the entire thing in time, the customers or consumers will not get the things in time. So the priority will be faulty if at this point of time the company gives priority to the consumers. So this is how an efficient management should give the priority, a lot of thinking, a lot of thought, a lot of time. Stakeholder management practice is about valuing stakeholder contributions to an organization, no matter how significant or insignificant or inspired or influential their contribution may or may not be. So at some place in that list of prioritization, every stakeholder will be there, and they keep moving up and down based on the time and the company's strategy and the company's phase of business. So based on that, they are there. Now, how is this listing of stakeholders done? This, first of all, data is gathered, data analysis and gathering and analysis through various agencies that can be done. It can be done from social media. It can be done from web. In case of, let's say companies like Amazon and Flipkart, you can get the data from the web application only. And then once this data is gathered, these are analyzed, and the stakeholders are put in the particular priority lists. Now, I just read recent news which says that we all know about this Dubai Expo that took place recently. This is there a report was presented which is called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, GEM report 2021-2022. It states that India is among the 5 top economies for ease of doing business. Now, with this, I come to the ease of doing business part. So in this, just a month back, this expo took place, and it says this global report, which has taken into consideration 500, sources, 500 across the world. So they have said that India is one of the top 5 economies when it comes to ease of doing business. But this is totally flawed. This is not true. This is not true. I'll say how. Because if you have heard about that ease of doing business index, there's something called ease of doing business index, which I'm going to discuss now. Now, because I have discussed already in the background how the government is trying to bring about ease of doing business. Definitely, ease of doing business is one of the priorities of this particular the current government, but it has so many initiatives that we have already discussed. I have discussed in the very beginning, but to what extent it is able to bring about that ease of doing business. This particular report says India is the fifth top globally in terms of ease of doing business, but I say this is flawed because I'm putting more emphasis on this ease of doing business index of the World Bank. Although this index has been discontinued from 2021. Now I'll go back to that, why this happened. Now let me first tell you what is this ease of doing business index. Now uh, this index was created by three persons: Simon Jankov, Mikhail Klein, and Karali McLeish. Now, these were three leading economists of the World Bank Group, and it started, this index was introduced in the year 2008, and it continued till 2020, 2008 to 2020, which means a 13-year period it was valid. And I'll discuss the ranking of India in comparison to other countries during this 13-year span before it was discontinued. Now, when this was, introduced in the year 2008, across 190 countries, 100, because it was done by World Bank. It was in the form of a questionnaire. So this questionnaire was given to. I'll tell you about the details about what type of a questionnaire it was later on. And this India at that point of time in 2008 was in the 139th rank, 139 rank out of 190 countries, which means 52nd rank from the back. So now over the years, it has gradually improved from 2008, and the last ranking as on 2020 was 63, which is the all-time best that India has achieved. Now, if India is this ease of doing business index shows what is the ranking of a country in terms of ease of doing business. So if India is, as per the latest ranking, India is at the 63rd position. So there is no way that this report that was presented by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, GEM in Dubai recently, which states India is in the 5th position. I do not, I cannot say that is true, because this is a private agency doing this survey, and that was done by the World Bank. Now, over this 18-year period, over this 13-year period, it's not really 18 years, 13-year period, 5,000 number of 5,000 regulations were checked. Regulations in the form of laws and rules and guidelines and all these restrictions, license requirements and all that in these countries were checked by this World Bank, and before coming into the conclusion about the top ranking. Now, generally over all these years, which country was featuring at the top of ease of doing business? There is no it's not a surprise. We all will probably be able to guess. It is Singapore. So Singapore has been on the top for the most period of time, followed by Hong Kong. That also is an easy guess. But the the latest top country was New Zealand. And the country which made the maximum progress, which was not in the top, but which has jumped the maximum number of ranks, was Poland, which means the Poland is, gradually coming up very fast as a country with a very high ease of doing business. Now, other top countries are United States, Denmark, and Georgia. So apart from Singapore, Hong Kong, New Zealand, United States, Denmark, and Georgia are the other countries which have good in ease of doing. So as I mentioned, India started with the rank of 139, and it ended up at 63, and it was the data was discontinued by this index was discontinued by the World Bank in September 2021 because of many allegations about some controversies. The 2018 data and 2020 data came up with a lot of controversy. 2020 data's target was China. The data of China was controversial, and 2018, I guess, UAE and some other countries which uh, I just have to check. Yes, in 2018, China's data was manipulated. They were controversy that the Chinese data was manipulated, giving it a higher rank. Why would want to have a higher rank to attract more foreign investment and all that? Because for investors think that you have a great ease of doing business, so they invest more. So China's data was manipulated, and they were given a better rank than they deserved. In 2020, the same allegation was again for China, Azerbaijan, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, and lots of report were presented against this in the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and even in the Financial Times of India. So this resulted in employing a particular audit committee which investigated that particular allegations, and they came to a conclusion that yes, indeed the data were manipulated. So based on that report, this particular index was discontinued, which is bad, of course. I hope that World Bank comes up with a similar kind of index for future, with a manipulation proof system, because this helps countries like us which have ease of doing business as one of the greatest agenda. We have some kind of a motivation to have to, because we are jumping ranks, we are becoming better and better and better. So when we have this global ranking like that, we always have the initiative and the motivation to do better. The government has the motivation to do better. So this is really good for countries, developing countries like India. So I really hope that it does come up again in a new avatar. Now, this particular data, how did it work? Now, it was based on a standard questionnaire consisting of many questions was given to many entrepreneurs in all the 190 countries. They had to fill it up based on the regulations and the difficulties and everything that they faced. For example, let's say the question is, how much time does it take to open a company in your country? So let's say in Singapore, they might be able to say 1 day. In India, we are able to say at the minimum, 25 days. Normally it takes 30, 40, 45 days. So the person who is filling up the questionnaire may have a bad experience with forming a company, may have a very good experience. So a person may write 20 days, another person may write 60 days. So, the average will be taken. 5 persons of Singapore may write, 1 day, 2 day, 5 days. So their average will be much better than our average. So these are the type of questions. How much time does it take to get a patent in your country? How many licenses do you require to operate your business? So something like that. This checks all these checks, like how much time do you need to open a bank account, and what restrictions are there in the bank accounts that you open. So these types of questions actually judge what are the difficulties that new entrepreneurs face in running their companies. So based on this, the data is collected from all the countries. They are compared, and after comparing, this data is, the indices are awarded. Now, there was, apart from the controversy, the manipulation that happened, there were some Okay, I'll come to that later. First, I'll say the indices after the questionnaire are collected and they are ranked, and based on those, there are 10 sub indices, which are the for which the points are allotted. Number one is starting a business. The example that I just mentioned, this is one criteria of awarding a point. Number two is dealing with construction permits. I mentioned about permits and licenses. So this is two. Number three, getting electricity. Of course, electricity is important for your business. So how much time, the procedure, time, cost required for a business, etc. Registering properties, because a company, when it opens its business, it has to have a property of its own. So how much time does it take to registering the property, the time, cost, etc. involved. Getting credit, how much time the entrepreneurs take, and how easy it is to get credit to facilities. Then protecting investors, are the investors protected? Obviously, business scenario will be good in a country where investors feel protected, their money is safe. So what is the protection level of investors in the country? Paying taxes, number of taxes the country you are required to pay in your country, the hours spent preparing tax returns, and the total tax payable in percentage of gross profit, etc. Trading across borders. Now, if you are trading with other countries, what is the number of documents you have to prepare, and how much time it takes, what is the cost involved. Then enforcing contracts, what is the ease in enforcing contracts, the procedure, time, cost involved. And resolving insolvency, which we know in India it is the latest addition to ease of doing business. But of course, that there is a lot of debate about that topic, so it's not the right platform to discuss. So resolving insolvency, how much time, cost, and recovery rate, what is in terms of percentage it is available in a particular country in terms of in case of bankruptcy proceedings. So these are the 10 subheads under which points were allotted, and based on these the ranking was done, which India is at the 63rd position. So although it may seem very rosy inside the country that yes, India is doing really very well, but we compared to globally, we are not really in such a good position. Of course, we are better than our neighbors Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal, but so we have better investment than them in our country. But then if such indices are there for motivation, a country like India, which is in the right track, can definitely improve. Now, apart from the manipulations that were done, the controversies that happened, there were other reasons, other loopholes in the system of the indices, because it did not measure everything. For example, it did not directly measure the more general conditions, like how what is the proximity of a country to a big market. For example, a country in Africa, they may be a very good, the entrepreneurial system may be very good, very well developed, but if they want to export, they don't have a very huge market near them. They have to ship it, to a long distance market. So how close is India to a huge market? So that also matters for countries in Europe, or let's say the Americas. It is easier, even in India, because China is near. China is a big economy. Japan is a big economy. India is also not a bad one. So it's not that bad for India. But let's take the example of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka or Maldives, they are, in such a corner of the globe that they don't have a very big market near them. For Sri Lanka, of course, India is there, but for Maldives, none. So it's like, this is one thing that was never considered. All aspects of business environment that matter to the firms, like macroeconomic conditions, level of employment in the country, corruption, stability, poverty, etc. Now, these do not feature in the questionnaire, obviously. So these also matter, because if the level of employment in a country is, or let's say level of education, the literacy rate in a country. If your country's literacy rate is not good, it is expected that your workforce will not be so so talented, so good. So obviously the products will suffer, so your company profitability will suffer, so these will have some impact on your so this was not made part of the questionnaire. Now, strengths and weaknesses of neither the global financial system or the country's financial system, it was not made part of the questionnaire. And it also did not cover questions about the intellectual property rights. It only talked about patent and not the other IPRs. So these were the loopholes. So it has been discontinued as of now, as of today. But let's hope it comes back, and we have something to look forward to, something to motivate us, so that we can have a better ease of doing index in future. And that's about it. That's exactly what I wanted to discuss, the two headings. One for the reformed management practices, from the perspective of ethical decision making, keeping proper priorities to the stakeholders, and other from the ease of doing business perspective. Governance perspective, like my topic was relook at ease of doing a business from the governance perspective. Now, governance is such a huge term. Everything that I talked about comes within the ambit of a governance perspective. But if I take into account what Anil and Mr. Dr. Nandi has mentioned, so this all will come under governance practices. So I think I was able to do justice to it, and so that's it, Mr. Ghosh. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Very nice. There's been a request for a formal workshop from your end. So we will take that up later. At this moment, I request C.S. Ramaswamy Kalidas to deliver his thoughts. Shall I share the screen, sir?
Yeah, please. Hi, good afternoon. I hope I'm audible to all of you. Am I audible? Yeah, hi. Firstly, grateful thanks to the Chamber for having me. The last occasion I spoke was, I distinctly recall, for a specific reason, because the Chamber chose the wrong date to have the seminar. At that point in time, it was a physical seminar, and you had the specter of the whole city of Calcutta being sort of destabilized because of Madam Mamata Banerjee's solidarity or Martyrs' Day, and everyone was running helter-skelter, and there was hardly any audience to make a presentation. Be that as it may, we are on a virtual mode today thanks to the pandemic. Well, I must say that there are, the time that has been given to me is just 25 minutes, and I realize that this topic has actually three thematic divisions to it. So I really do not know to what extent I can make, do justice to the presentation, but I shall try and take you through at least on a bird's eye view perspective of the concepts that we are going to be discussing. Firstly, as I see it, I need to speak about the focus on the development of the corporate governance codes which facilitate management. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, there is so much diversity in approach insofar as the conceptual framework of governance is concerned that one can speak until the cows come home and yet not reach any unanimity insofar as the concept is concerned. Suffice to say, for simplicity purposes, I would say that corporate governance is all about promoting corporate fairness, transparency, and accountability. In fact, the OECD has very succinctly described governance as a system by which businesses are directed and controlled. Let's understand what is a trigger for a governance system, or in other words, what is a trigger for a proper corporate governance system. The trigger is basically coming from the uniqueness of the corporate form of business itself. This is the corporate form of business is unique in that there is a clear demarcation between the ownership of capital and the control over the company. Indeed, of course, in the context of India, which is primarily capital starved, the demarcation is not very distinct. But the fact of the matter is that where it comes to the ownership of capital, it is the shareholders who own the capital. And where it comes to management, the shareholders repose their faith on the board of directors who are supposed to provide direction and strategy to the operations of the company. So basic trigger is the uniqueness of the corporate form. And I will try and trace out the development of codes in the context of India from a historical perspective, firstly. Next slide, please. Yeah, governance, it's a fallacy to assume that the corporate governance can never be reduced to a code of governance. It can never be. A code is only a document for facilitating a governance model. Governance is all pervasive. In fact, governance has to flow through every facet of a business organization, be it human management, be it strategizing, marketing. Every facet of the company has to be embracing the principles of governance. And of course, being a pervasive concept, the approach to governance has necessarily to be top-down. And what is the advantage of having code of governance? Code of governance are necessary for two reasons. Firstly, they help in standardizing benchmarks insofar as evaluation of firms is concerned. They enable homogeneity insofar as compliance with procedure is concerned. And if there is homogeneity, then the benchmarking of firms becomes much easier. And another reason why codes become necessary is basically because there is this human hypothesis about man. In fact, Douglas McGregor had made this hypothesis in his behavioral sciences approach to human behavior when he spoke about theory X and theory Y, and these were two extreme postulates. In theory X, he assumed that man is all keen. He's not a docile animal. He's keen to embrace law, and he's law-abiding. He's trying to initiate things and positively do his activities. The other extreme is theory Y, which speaks about man's indolence. Man is supposed to be a docile animal and never given to accepting laws or regulations very easily. And therefore, he's somebody who has to be coaxed into rational behavior through this approach of carrot and stick, which is why you have regulations to direct the behavioral aspects where it comes to the corporation as well. Next. Yeah, where it comes to India, the movement towards corporate governance was somewhat somnolent until the 1980s, when we had this concept of a very closed economy. In fact, if you recall, we had this approach where you had a mixed up economy in place, and most of the industries, particularly the ones that were strategic, were in the hands of the government. And in fact, since we have this obsession towards tolerance, there was this oft-repeated expression which was used in the Indian context about India as a country being obsessed with the Hindu rate of growth. In fact, we are quite happy with the rate of growth of as low as 4%, and which is why we didn't open up the economy of the country until the emergence of the 90s, when the situation became extremely grave in terms of the balance of payment position, necessitating the government to open up the economy and introduce liberalization in 1991. And so therefore, to my mind, the evolution of corporate governance in this country goes back to the 90s, once the world was reduced to a borderless village. And also, along with this happening, major thinking, metamorphosis in economic thinking was the fact that there was a slow but steady growth to equity culture, thanks to people like Dhirubhai Ambani, who made the stock market no longer an esoteric animal where an uninitiated investor was concerned. The development of the equity culture made people, even those that were uninitiated, to assuming the stock market was the proverbial pot of gold. And when that happens, when people enter the market, there is inevitably a possibility of the uninitiated investor being taken on the war path, kind of being short charged about his investments. And there was this necessity to also introduce checks and balances to ensure that the stock market behaved. And the fact that foreign capital was being invited lock, stock, and barrel necessitated that the laws of the country were also flexed in a manner to catch up with the standards where the world is obsessive where it comes to law-abiding and compliance requirements, and therefore it was a necessity to move the barometer insofar as the compliance model and the legal framework was concerned in this country to make it compatible with the requirements of the developed markets. Right. Next slide, please. Now, with this emerging, you had the first code of governance was the voluntary code of corporate governance, which was introduced by the CII, and this is known as the desirable code of governance. And this was the first institutional framework, institutional initiative towards corporate governance. Of course, where it comes to governance, the ethos of governance are well entrenched in our ancient scriptures. In fact, Kautilya speaks about the four prime duties of a king, which is Raksha, Vriddhi, then he talks about Yogashama. So these are all basically built into the models which we have developed towards corporate governance over the years. I'm not, of course, these were substantially influenced by the happenings in the West, but primarily there was something which was endemic to this country in terms of the need, and therefore it is not as if we replicated the sophisticated models of the West into the governance code from the beginning. Thereafter, we had the specter of the Kumar Mangalam committee report, and for the first time, the need for governance was enshrined in the form of a regulation. Of course, it was not a regulation in the sense of regulation being introduced by a statutory authority, but it was an insert in the listing regulations which companies had to enter into with stock exchanges. Clause 49 in the listing regulation provided for the code of corporate governance, where of course the focus was firstly on the introduction of this animal called the independent director, and then there was the requirement that you should have greater transparency in terms of an qualitative audit committee, and then of course the rewarding system mechanism for employees and senior management and directors, of course, should be done in a professional manner through the introduction of a nomination committee. But there were certain limitations in clause 49, and it was necessary. In fact, governance is so dynamic, it can never be static. There cannot be an equilibrium to the dynamics of governance. And the Naresh Chandra committee had to necessarily look at governance from a different perspective in the backdrop of what happened in the US and the collapse of the Arthur Andersen and the Enron, which was basically triggered off by audit failures. And there was a need for looking at audit differently in the form of providing for a requirement of a rotation of auditors, and in the form of reforms in the qualitative aspect of accounting by introducing tougher accounting standards and disclosure norms in accounting. In fact, the Naresh Chandra committee spoke about the requirement of rotation of auditors and the fact that auditors should not be involved substantially in non-audit exercises insofar as a corporate is concerned. Next, please. Yeah, the Naresh Chandra committee report, as I said, redefined auditor-client relationships and developed a code for independent directors. And that was followed again by a further refinement, which was done under the leadership of Narayan Murthy. And in fact, to my mind, what stood as a benchmark or a watershed insofar as the development of the governance movement is concerned is the emergence of SEBI as a statutory body. And then, of course, the Companies Act 2013, to my mind, is a major catalyst to the corporate governance movement in the country because it captures substantially several nuances of what corporate governance is all about. For the first time, we have a specter of independent directors being mandated specifically for companies of certain genre. We have the requirement of an audit committee being provided a code for its functioning. And then we have also the requirement that, there should be an independent directors meeting. And of course, SEBI, what they did upon becoming a regulatory body, upon becoming a statutory body, revamped the entire provisions relating to corporate governance through the introduction of regulation by the euphemism of SEBI LODR, that is listing obligations and disclosure requirements, which meant a paradigm shift insofar as corporate governance is concerned. And this regulation actually provided a major teeth to governance, as it were, in that it had the mandatory force of SEBI, and it compelled companies to comply with the requirements, the humongous requirements that have been thrown up by the regulations, as it were. 2015 was therefore a landmark insofar as and 2013 and 15, to my mind, were positive watersheds insofar as the corporate governance movement in this country is concerned. Next. Yeah, 2000, in fact, it was felt that what was done by way of regulation was not good enough, and the regulation needed to be made more contemporaneous. And therefore, we had the Kotak committee, Uday Kotak-led committee, recommending reforms in the LODR provisions, and pursuant thereto, SEBI introduced several further requirements, including the requirement for a risk management committee, then the need for making a one-way, video conferencing facility insofar as annual general meetings were concerned for the top 100 companies. Of course, thanks to the pandemic, this became a norm for almost every company. And then there is today, we have seen in 2021, an extremely important reform that has happened around corporate governance, which relates primarily to the area of related party transactions. In fact, the already onerous responsibilities that the independent directors have to share on the boardroom has been increased substantially by their being made responsible for approving related party transactions. Now, independent directors come 1st of January 2022 have become responsible for related party transactions being approved. And it is not the audit committee which has the responsibility any longer, because it is those that are the independent directors who form the part of the committee who are now responsible for approving related party transactions. So to my mind, this is a double-edged sword in that, firstly, you are defying the ethos associated with independence. An independent director, by definition, is supposed to be a non-executive director. And by making him responsible for approving a related party transaction, you are willingly asking him to do an executive function, which to my mind is not correct. And second thing about this reform is, I'm not sure whether the independence director has the commercial wherewithal to understand the rationale of a related party transaction. So what was basically an office of a director was primarily initially it was a sinecure. In fact, I recall my initial days in the profession, board meetings were a cakewalk, and we all look forward to. There was in my board, a retired IFS who happened also to be the Indian ambassador to France, and he would regale us by his stories on his diplomatic forays. So board, directors were basically sinecures. They were entitled to a certain amount of fee and a good generous lunch and the goodies that went with with a place in the board. But today now the board director's crown is no longer so cushy. It's actually a thorny crown that he has to wear. And over the years, it's becoming increasingly complex for you to act as an independent director. And I do not know how many of you in the audience have now read through. There is a major reform in the offing. Of course, this is not in the form of a regulation, because it's not being done by a regulator who has a statutory force to introduce reforms through the statute book. The National Stock Exchange has introduced a concept called the prime security list. In fact, they are taking corporate governance to several notches above the statute book. They are talking about every company having 2 women directors. They're speaking about the board being represented in terms of a quorum by at least 50%. Otherwise, the meeting cannot happen. Then there is also this requirement that the risk management committee should be led by an independent director, which is rightly so. And then, of course, there is a mandate for a sustainability report. And these, mind you, this is a voluntary entry point in the sense that whichever company wants to embrace governance and wants to practice governance more as not a ticking the box approach, because after all, today we believe that once you have satisfied the requirements of LODR provisions, the assumption is that governance has been complied with. But really that is not true at all, because that is only compliance, which is very superficial, and governance has to be actually manifested more in substance as opposed to form. So, but then NSE's initiative is pretty laudable, because there is going to be a definite pressure on corporates to embrace this, because world over, companies look at the world investment agencies look at governance as something which is beyond regulation as is practiced in this country. Next. I come to the second part of my discussion point, which is on transparency and accountability and the need for dissemination of information. Transparency and accountability, to my mind, constitute the twin bedrocks on which the corporate governance movement, the edifice of corporate governance movement rests. And why is it important to have transparency? I mean, particularly when there is a public stake in the company, which is very substantial. Now, let's understand why the stock market does not always behave rationally. To my mind, if information were freely available, there should be no gap, there should be no divergence between the intrinsic value of a company's stock and its market value. But the reason why there is a divergence is primarily because market does not have access to perfect information. There is asymmetry insofar as the availability of information is concerned, and this asymmetry brings with it the attendant perils. As somebody who's an investor who's not aware of what is happening within the confines of the boardroom, I'm under great danger as opposed to somebody who has access to price-sensitive information. And this is exactly one area which the corporate governance codes in this country have tried to address over a period of time. Firstly, I recall in clause 49, you had the specter of quarterly results being disseminated by the listed companies. In fact, you had only requirement of annual results, and there was no such thing as a director's report, which also looked at the macro parameters in the form of a management discussion and analysis report, which was also thrown upon by way of a requirement in the clause 49 provisions. Now, apart from that, now what has happened is that insofar as accounting financial information is concerned, you need to disseminate it not only with within a periodicity, in fact 45 days from the close of the quarter, and more importantly, there is a quasi audit in the form of a auditor providing a limited review, which also allows him the liberty to provide a modified opinion or qualify the report on some fairness area. And of course, you now have to have consolidated reporting, consolidated financial results, given the fact that a conglomerate's strength is only recognized on a consolidated basis and can never be recognized on a standalone basis. Now, apart from financial reporting, there has been a very, very major paradigm shift insofar as dissemination of price-sensitive information is concerned. Regulation 30 now ordains. Previously, you could have this cherry-picking approach where companies could choose to decide and disseminate information which was giving to the investor a feel-good factor. Now, that enabled a company to stash away information which would not be very, very palatable insofar as the investor is concerned. So there was no, so materiality was what constituted material price sensitive information was left to the discretion of the management to decide. Materiality is no longer the decision which is left to the management. In fact, Regulation 30 provides for several items of information, whether you consider it material or not. In fact, Part A of schedule in the LODR provisions provides for information which has to be disseminated even if you do not consider it materiality. So much so, even if you do not consider it material, so much so that companies are becoming obsessive with disseminating information. I recall HDFC Bank making a stock exchange filing when their managing director suffered a heart attack. I almost thought that the company will continue to issue a daily health bulletin, which they did not. So the point I'm making is, therefore, there's no longer possible for you to cherry pick on information that you have to disseminate to the unsuspecting public. Of course, there is a certain area of information which is left to the decision of the management insofar as but you need to have a policy on materiality. And to my mind, nobody is allowed to be now behave in the corporate world like Shakespeare's Hamlet. You can't say in famous the soliloquy of Hamlet where he says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Now, that is no longer a prerogative. You need to, if there is any doubt you have in mind as to whether the information is material or not, to my mind, the right thing to do is to inform, to disseminate. Otherwise, the market's got its ear to the ground. And if you are going to be very reclusive in your approach where it comes to disseminating information, sooner or later, the regulator is going to catch up on you. So this is one major area where it comes to dissemination of information. And to my mind, this is a laudatory step that has been done. With the consequence being that whether it is palatable or not, you are supposed to disclose information which is price sensitive in nature. Next. There has also been changes in the PIT regulations, that is the regulations relating to prevention of insider trading. I cannot elaborate on this, but SEBI has been extremely alert where it comes to launching investigations on abuse of price-sensitive information. To my mind, there is one major reform that is still required to make this law very. I think there is a need for vicarious liability to be fastened on to any case of abuse of price-sensitive information, like abuse of price-sensitive information. So much so that in the United States, you have the specter of people being hauled up and sent to jail. In fact, you had the example of Rajat Gupta spending a good 2 years because of a conversation of 30 seconds which he had whilst attending a meeting in Goldman Sachs. So there is this requirement to make the liability should, to my mind, for abuse of price-sensitive information should be made vicarious. But having said that, there has been substantial improvement insofar as this regulation is concerned, in that today price-sensitive information can be shared only on a need-to-know basis, and every company needs to maintain a structured database and where you will record who are the people to whom you are sharing information and for what period of time. And you are not allowed to also now allow trading where it comes to those that are covered in a code, in the fair play code of the company. You are not allowed to trade from the time the quarter closes until 2 days after the results are announced. And there's a huge presumption in the law which makes any endeavor to misuse price sensitive information very dangerous, because there is a presumption that if you are an insider, and the definition of insider is very widespread, it's inclusive, and if you are an insider and if you are dealing in the company stock as an insider, then the presumption is that you have done so with the foreknowledge of price sensitive information. Of course, this presumption is subject to rebuttal, but the essential presumption is that you have traded on the stock by virtue of the fact that you have foreknowledge of price sensitive information. This is a major reform in the law. Next. Next, please. I hope I'm sticking to time. I realize that I've spoken only for about 20 minutes. Now, I come to the last segment of my discussion, which is capacity building. What is capacity building? Capacity building, well, you have to look at capacity building from the micro level of the firm, as also capacity building from the macro level of a country. Capacity building is all about improving or acquiring skills, processes, and systems to meet the core functions of governance. Now, governance, as I said, is actually pervasive. It has to trickle down to the customer. It has to trickle down to the level of the creditor. These people will also have to have opportunities to bring to the board management any situation where there is abuse of economic power. If there is any wrongdoing or fraud which is being perpetrated on them, they should have an opportunity to ventilate their grievances through this whistleblowing mechanism. And therefore, you need to develop systems which have all these touch points to the governance system. And for this purpose, you need to invest in very substantially in skill training and development of role models. You need to have people that will act as mentors to usher in a very strong and robust governance system. And you need to have, where it comes to governance or capacity building at the macro level, you need to have a high degree of transparency where it comes to institutional running operations. In fact, in India, to my mind, this right to information is a major reform which has brought to light. You can now you can even ask the Prime Minister's office to provide information about the expenditure that has been incurred on his overseas jaunts. So this is one area, to my mind, where transparency has increased. And then you can see that there is a substantial improvement where it comes to the way government offices work. In fact, I was very surprised that I applied for a change in my passport address, and lo and behold, I got my passport in 24 hours flat. And let me tell you that I didn't have to grease any palm. In fact, I made the inspection also in the police department, and it was a just walk in the park. I mean, compare it with what was happening. I remember the first time I applied for a passport in 2003, I had to wait for 4 months. And apart from that, I had to also grease many a palm. So therefore, you are looking at a situation where capacity building is taking root. I mean, taking root not only at the level of the firm, but also at the level of the government. And you need to develop, particularly the skill development is extremely important where it comes to the underprivileged people, served people, the vulnerable groups. They need to be initiated into the process of governance. And to my mind, leadership is at the core of capacity building. And I I see that where it comes to, as I said, the macro level, macro perspective, I feel very happy that green shoots have already developed where it comes to capacity building for governance, and we will soon change governance to country governance as opposed to corporate governance, and that I think is not very far, provided, of course, we do other reforms also, which is also happening in the sense that you have, where it comes to tax management, today you have the specter of faceless assessments. You don't have to wait endlessly like I used to do in my formative years in my profession for the income tax officer to call you to sort of, you had to please him in many ways, not only by taking him to lunches and dinners and so on, but by exchange of envelopes and so on and so forth. These are all things which are changing very, very refreshingly. And the day is not far off when probably in terms of, if there is an index for transparency, which is brought into the system at a world level, India will soon touch the zenith. That is my fond assumption, but I dare say that that day is not very far off. Now, this is a short description about capacity building. In fact, one can speak until the cows come home on this subject, but we haven't the luxury of time. So I'll finally close my discussion with some, I will have my concluding musings in the next slide and wind up my discussion for the day. Now, how do you develop capacities? This is one area which I wanted to spend a little time. You have to develop capacity both with a long-term and a medium-term perspective. And of course, the rule of law needs to be strengthened for governance to develop at a macro level. And the rule of law, indeed, to my mind, is improving in that we have the specter of now even politicians spending time behind the bars. So, and then you also need to elicit public opinion and ensure societal participation in the process of capacity building. And the extension of the traits of good governance and financial accountability, which are already there in the micro perspective, need to be developed at the macro level in the form of public accounts being made more transparent and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. As I said, there cannot be any static equilibrium to the governance process. Governance is, we are operating in the midst of an ecosystem which is constantly changing, and therefore governance can never be addressed. You have to always scale up governance. And to my mind, one way of doing governance through regulation is, there is this principle in law, which I am very obsessive about. Law tells you to do certain things. You can do certain things which the law does not tell you, but then the law is not going to prevent you from doing certain things. Like, for instance, how many of us obey traffic rules meticulously? I mean, how many of us obey the rules where it comes to crossing the road? You do not, people run helter-skelter. I mean, they stop the traffic at their will, but there are these people that go to the zebra crossing and make their shift to the other side of the road. So what I'm trying to say is that kindly, we must take governance as a mantra, as something which is, we should be obsessive with it. And that is why I say that in law, what is not prescribed is not necessarily proscribed. If law does not prescribe certain things, you do not have to assume that it is not allowed. In fact, the more voluntary that you are where it comes to compliance, and you go beyond compliance, that is where you are going to reach the zenith of governance. And governance, the courts have a extremely, there is a huge limitation to the code, because you can only take, like they say, you can only take the horse to the water. You can never make the horse to drink. And that will be possible only when you embrace governance from within you. Like Mother Teresa said, I mean, we have CSR, etc. But Mother Teresa said even before CSR became a norm, give until it hurts you. So therefore, to my mind, be compliant, be obsessive about governance until it begins to hurt you. And then, of course, we are also seeing the refreshing phenomena in this country of a new change in the, the makeup of the entrepreneur, thanks to startups, etc. And there is this phenomena of the king cannot do wrong. That was a perception that business houses had of where it comes to promoters. That mercifully is disappearing. And I'm sure that the day is not far off when governance will become not a norm which is prescribed under law, but a mantra which is voluntarily practiced by all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope I finish my discussion well within the time slot allotted to me. I would love to, sort of expand on the concepts of disclosure, etc. Perhaps we could do it in some other day. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. G.R. Srikanth, please share on the corporate governance and IT, corporate reporting and IT governance. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rajeshri. Thank you, Mr. Chattopadhyay. Good evening, everyone. And it's wonderful to hear all my preceding panelists for these last 2 hours. After their enlightening sessions, after their enlightening speak, it is very difficult for me to draw the attention of the participants. In spite of that, I'll try my best. I'll do it. So it was a pleasure to be here, and I'm sharing my thoughts on corporate reporting and IT governance. If you see that over last 2 months, last couple of months, all business news and all business columns of newspapers covering only a couple of issues. One is Bharat Pay and second is National Stock Exchange. So what happened there? There are issues related to corporate governance. There are issues related to data. There are issues related to disclosures. So if you intersect these two isolated cases, one happened 5 years ago and one happened very recently. If you intersect and you will find one common thread. What is that common thread? That common thread is about governance. So as Mr. Ramaswamy said, as Mr. Nandi has said, and Madam Rupanjana has said, everything, the underlying thing is the corporate governance. Like Mr. Ramaswamy already said that corporate governance cannot be imposed, it has to be inculcated inside. So how you inculcate a corporate governance? Corporate governance you cannot create overnight. It has to come within. How? There are organizations which are trying to build this from last many years, or rather many decades, by way of putting core values in their business function, right from the starting function, right from the sourcing to end of the sale, depends upon the nature of the company. So every function, it's not at the board level, it's not at the management level, but every function, the good practices, ethical practices, what Madam also spoke earlier, the ethical practices, the moral practices, as of course legal, everyone has to follow the legal. So whatever the mandate is mandatory, there is no discussion on that. But apart from this, the self-regulation part, what every corporate is trying to imbibe into their culture, and they're creating a culture for a corporate governance. So today, I need to next 20 minutes discuss on the corporate reporting and IT governance. These are the subset of corporate governance. Corporate reporting is backed by some laws. Like earlier, it was also showed that you have Companies Act 2013, SEBI for listing companies, you have LODR. So there are a lot of regulation which back for the corporate reporting. But for IT governance, there are various policies. There's no strict regulation that we need to have IT governance. I will discuss why IT governance is there. Before that, I'll just share my screen. So is it visible? My screen is visible. Hello.
Yes, please.
Oh, thanks. So when we're talking about corporate reporting, it's about sharing the information to the stakeholders. Over the years, what the sharing of the information, what it's been treated as a part of compliances. Part of compliances is earlier it's every once in a year you need to furnish record. Thereafter it has been quarterly. So it's the part of practice of a compliances rather than actually sharing the information. Sometimes and most of the reports which contains inundated with lot of information which is not related to the context. The information because today everything and anything is depend upon the data and information, because that is the new oil. We know that the information, how the information is related to the stakeholders. See, as a trader, I look at certain ratios to make an investment. Someone is a long-term investor who read differently. If a researcher who takes information differently. So every different person takes this information differently and they make their own strategy. A long-term investor is definitely looking for a strategy and value creation. The stakeholders, or rather the investors, have such a vast, diverse group. They look for information from their perspective. So the corporate reporting should address all these stakeholders, all this information. Suppose when we are talking about UK, you have the stewardship board, of course, which is not mandatory in India, but UK has come up with a self-regulatory that is placed in UK stewardship board, where the institutional investors can be part of their business. They are not only invest in the business, they're the part of the business and they'll handle the promoters and they'll give all their expertise. These big mutual fund house, pension fund house, they'll be, and in the process, what happened? They'll create a transparency and they'll give the inputs to the investing companies and they engage with these investing companies as if they're like a shareholders, and they're also attend every meetings and they'll give the. What happens to this? This happens to create a corporate communication, because earlier we seen a lot of companies not last decade or 2 decades, but in the past, what we read it that it's a totally opaque. The communication, the reporting was totally opaque. But over a period of time, we are still in the evolving in the cusp of what we are reading and what we are hearing. That since last so many years, we are in the cusp of going into the open, from the opaque to the transparent, and to the certain extent, we achieved. SEBI has achieved all its. If you ask me, SEBI has achieved all its objectives. Answer is yes and no. Why? We know the reasons, because, like my previous speakers already said, that SEBI has some legislation with back the law, and certain is not there, and some it can be only a quasi-judicial. So again, coming back to the corporate reporting, it has a vital communication which interact with your all stakeholders, your shareholder, debenture holders, the public at large, and those even in the government also. So over a period of time, the businesses are moving from isolated financial statement to integrated corporate reporting. Like Mr. Anil Dubey in the initially said that how last year it was a voluntary disclosure under BRSR, now it's become a mandatory. So over a period of time, here the financial reporting, which was an isolation, which was standalone financial numbers, only giving a quantitative data, not a qualitative data, now is going towards the integrated process. Again, it's come down in the process of a corporate governance. The integrated report goes beyond the numbers. It gives the details of how companies creating the value. If you take a fintech company, or if you take an internet company, the numbers hardly matters anything, because they say if you see a unicorn, $1 billion company, the sales must be hardly anything. It's 100 crores or 200 crores, but the valuation is $1 billion. How this, if you go purely by the numbers, then that can't be the normally. Typically, the valuation is 3x, 4x of its sales. But here it's more than 100 times, sometimes even more than 100 times. How they're creating? They're creating the value that is based upon the futuristic aspect, the business, what it derive over a period of time, and how they're contributing the society, and how they're focusing on the other ESG aspect of the business. Uh, as per the study of recently, the Bharat Grant Thornton Bharat has conducted an interview all the business heads, all the CEOs of the company, and 75% of the CEOs have voted in favor of integrated reporting because it helps their organization to have the proper feedback with the stakeholders, and it helps their organization to assess by the respective stakeholders. So again, this again shows the need for going towards integrated reporting. Now we are talking about integrated reporting. So what is the difference between the financial report and integrated report? We all know that financial report contains a financial statement and the numbers, whereas integrated report contains not only financial but also non-financial information, which primarily focus on what we talked since last 2 hours: your sustainability, your ESG, and your other factors of value creation. So we are talking about sustainability and ESG, whether the two are same or two are different. It depends upon the context, but as sustainability is a larger context and ESG is again a subset of that. Why? Because the sustainability has a wider audience, which includes your right from the shareholders to government to the society and your responsibility towards your nature. We all know that all this fossil fuels is going to come down for next 20-30 years. It's going to last maximum 30-40 years. That's saw an opportunity for Tesla, and Tesla launched an electrical car, and Tesla has become the #1 company in the world. It has over a period of companies which are GM and other companies which there in the automotive business since last 100 years. The Tesla has taken over within a period of last 10 years. So this is how again again we are coming to that ESG and sustainability, how that creates the value, how that creates the capitalization to any company. Now, when we're talking about reporting, financial reporting, actually much has been thought prior to this about why we have a legal backing for a financial reporting. We have a legal backing for a listed companies. So I'm not going to further repeat the same thing. But when you're talking about the integrated reporting, it gives a detailed picture and it gives a detail. See, if you like Mr. Ramaswamy earlier said that he has started from Naresh Chandra Company, then Narayan Murthy Company, then Kumar Mangalam Birla Company. So 20 years ago, whatever the discussions, whatever the recommendations, or rather whatever the guidelines given by these committees now has become a law. Now, what we are talking about, the other areas like your ESG and your sustainability and your other non-finance numbers, and who knows, after 5 years or after 4 years down the line, it can become a law. So now it's an opportunity for the industries, especially because large industry, if you take about Nifty 50 companies or Sensex 30 companies, they all are compliant and can be compliant because they have a battery of people. They have the separate team of sustainability. In fact, where I work, I head the sustainability division of my company. So what we do a lot of activities which need to reduce the carbon emissions, which is need to increase the green energy, which is reduce the carbon dioxide. So these areas will work, but especially the small companies, SMEs and small companies, they as an opportunity to regulate themselves and to follow, so that the next 3-4 years they have a timeline, so that they can able to imbibe and inculcate the best practices of the top companies, and they can also be able to commence this business of reporting immediately upon this has become the mandatory. So this is already Mr. Anil Kumar has already told about the BRSR reports and all. I'm not again going to repeat it. Now next year onwards, for top 1,000 companies by market valuation, these reports are compulsory. But I'd like to share some of the best practices what in the company what we have treated. So in 2013-14, we decided that we want to go to a sustainability area, and our corporate core values also been modified by including a sustainability as one of the core value. Immediately what we got an opportunity, and immediately we identified the areas where we can have a solar rooftops. So immediately we identified some places, and we, for a period of within a period of 6 months, we installed solar rooftops. Today we are generating around 0.6 megawatt, that is 600 kilowatt power. On account of that, we able to reduce the electricity bills. Also, indirectly, we able to contribute to environment. Parallelly, in last couple of years, what we focusing on reducing the plastic wastage, because we all know that single-use plastic has become a menace to the society and government. In fact, Honorable Prime Minister also last Independence Day said that next 2 years, single-use plastic will be off the market, and there is not going to be any single-use plastic waste. So we have already taken this as a voluntary step and as a self-regulation. So next 2 years, not only single-use plastic, but plastic wherever we can reduce in all forms. The other area, what we did under our ESG or sustainability, that we want to reduce the lumex, because lumex is the unit of measurement for the light. So we have identified the areas where we need to have, we had conducted a proper study with one of the leading energy management company, and we identified what kind of and what is the amount of lumex need to be there in warehouse, in the store or offices, so respectively, so that otherwise what used to happen if you just lit the live switch and your hundreds of bulbs, hundreds of tubelights will be glowing. So we don't know. Again, we gone into the another area of energy management where we control the entire ACs all across the country to IoT, where we reduce the electricity based on the temperature, because normal thermodynamics works if you switch off very hardly, because now it's not a domestic AC. Domestic AC, you have a confined space where the thermostat will act. In case of the business houses, if there's a large offices, in case of large supermarkets, hypermarkets, there is an entry and exit open and a lot of activities going on, that thermostatic doesn't work automatically. We need to control through IoT. So on account of that, we able to manage the electricity. And thirdly, depletion of water. Of course, our industry is not a water-based industry, but wherever we have opportunity, there we have done a water harvesting, and we done is conducted a initial survey. Whatever the water we are taking, we are again water reinforcing, harvesting more than what we are consuming. It's about 20% more than what we are consuming. So these are the activities. These are the sum of the activities, but we have a larger activities. In fact, we engage with our vendors. And we ensure that our vendors and their contractors shall not employ any kind of child labor or any kind of bonded labor. They need to make the payments more than minimum wages or minimum wages as prescribed by the government. So these all forming part of my social. So my environment and the social and the governance. So we are addressing. These are going to become, and these are the factors. These are my capital. These are going to invest valuation. This is definitely going to bring valuation over a period of time. And once the integrated reporting comes to play, this plays a major role, because as I said earlier, the data information is the oil. Now, these are the factors which my data I'm reporting in such a manner, in integrated report, that is my automatically creating a value to the business. So, since we already discussed this, since we have made a lot of progress since the Companies Act last 9 years from the Companies Act 2013 and all, and I believe the next decade will we see similar kind of progress in integrated reporting. It gives an advantage. It's not only differentiate yourself in contributing the shaping a more vibrant economy or more vibrant Indian economy, but these are the best practices which can take place, and other people can also adapt, so that they can also contribute towards the society, and they create the value to the shareholders and to all the stakeholders. And once they become the mandatory, and everyone will have, again, what we have discussed about ease of doing business, the same thing, everyone will be at ease in implementing the same. We must also read about news that there are certain pension funds across the globe and certain superannuation funds across the globe that investing only in ESG compliant companies. They are investing only in companies which follows the integrated reporting. So again, this will give an advantage because we see one of the major FMCG company whose value is not growing since last 6 years, 7 years. Why? Because of the only concern that they are into the business. This is not falls under these three categories. So this is about all about the corporate reporting. We have already talked about ESG and all. So the second topic what was is IT governance. So corporate reporting and IT governance. So why we are talking about IT governance? Why we are not talking about HR governance or legal governance? Why I belong to a legal fraternity? Why we are not talking about a legal governance or HR governance or some other governance? Why we are asking? Why we are talking about IT governance? Is it limited to only IT people? Answer is no. Why we are talking about IT governance over last decade or so? Because it enables the business to achieve its objectives. As like a blood to a human being, IT, which flows to all functions, irrespective of the manufacturing in the company or a tech company or finance company, IT flows through all functions. So it has the ability and capacity to convert a business from a startup to a unicorn, from a startup to a multinational. I was reading a report where if not a report, I was talking to one of the angel investor who is the one of the top 100 angelist investor in the company. So whenever he interact with any companies where investee company where he want to make an investment, so first and foremost thing he is asked about his IT governance and how much time that CEO or CFO spends on the IT governance, because as per him, around 80% of CEOs or CFOs spend around 30% of their time on IT governance. So why they will spend? Because it ensures the alignment between the business and technology, and they have the capacity that they can create a value. And there was a primary goal of IT governance is to create a value to the business, and but also need to create a certain processes, certain systems where their investment, whatever the investment made in the company, will have the particular return. Return depends upon the nature and company and the segment where it works. So basically, the governance, the fundamental principles of the company should be strategic, aligned with the strategic objectives, and of course, anything is depends upon the budget and fund. They need to prioritize according to the availability and means. So the alignment it's also deals between the investment and the current business. Why we are talking about the IT is only by management for a certain business? Answer is no. It is for every business. So ultimately, all investments will be made in the IT considering about the end user requirements, because it's not about only the IT governance is not related to only the function of 10-20 people who are working in the IT department, but it applies right from the dispatch clerk to the CEO or MD of the company. Everyone, it's considered everyone, and it should consider a good IT governance should consider all requirements and all feedbacks of the end user. So we have a lot of standards on this. Yeah, ISO 38500 is also there. There it's basically it talks about effective and efficient system of IT in an organization. So why we need this? Why we need? One is the series of billions of transactions can be done at fast way, and you can have your money, your cost can be saved, and the labor, the amount of labor which can also be reduced. So enterprises over a period of time has been focusing on blending the both corporate reporting as well as IT governance. And if you take the top 10 companies by market valuation, you can clearly see that business reports having the statement of these both areas. One is the corporate reporting. When we talk about corporate reporting, the new era, it is an integrated report, and it is also supported and supplemented by IT governance. Then what are the 5 domain areas of IT governance? So these are the 5 areas. your value and delivery, we already spoke about value and delivery. The strategic alignment. The main object, the fundamental object of the IT has to be support, has to be taken into consideration of your organization structure and your end objectives. Then your performance management, everything, end of the day, whatever it is, whether it's an IT tool or any manpower or anything, it has to be assessed, evaluated against certain standards, and this performance has to be measured. Until unless the performance is not measured, it's like a student passing in exam with certain number of marks. So he has been evaluated considering the 10 or 20 questions. Similarly, whatever the governance system process, it has to be evaluated. It has to be evaluated thereafter. How better it is performing, how better it is resourceful, that has to be taken into consideration. And resource management, because it depends upon the nature of the company and what is the budget the company has, what the company can afford to implement a good IT system and good governance. IT governance, we're talking about IT governance, so how much they can afford. Accordingly, you need to tailor-made, you need to do it. Then risk management. The more organizations have a value proposition built on IT and risk associated with IT. Often the same risk the business have. Therefore, managing IT risk is a paramount. So risk management. We can't assess what is the risk, because nowadays you see a lot of malware coming into this, and you will get a mail end of the day that your entire servers has been hacked and you have to pay in bitcoins until unless we'll do anti-malware so that you can retrieve your data back. So how you are keeping your data back, you are copying it at periodical intervals or not, how secure and safe your firewalls are there, and your identity theft, your recovery from what is your disaster management plan, how your systems are resilient to the outrage. So these all covers under this risk management. And finally, it's about the accountability. So at the end of the day, accountability is a part of governance, and we know that we have seen that many people, where many companies have fallen from the grace, where the accountability was not there, or the transparency was not there, or reporting was not there. And going forward, as you already said, that honeymoon is over for the companies, because now the king can do no wrong. At Mr. Ramaswamy already said that king can do no wrong. Yes, the king can do no wrong, because it's not going to be a command of sovereign. It's going to be a system, process flow. And the entire thing is the transparent and everyone is watching. So why all we are talking about since last 2 hours about governance, sustainability, ESG, IT governance, why this is important? See, there are many important aspects of this, but if you list out, this will be the common 5 point. It enables the organization to demonstrate the results against the goals. It's also meet your legal and regulatory obligations. If you ask how you meet the legal and regulatory obligation by IT governance, then Madam has already talked about the ease of doing business. You will get a checklist, you will get a monthly reminders, you will get all reports in time, and you will file a report, you will compliance. Basically, it's about the compliances. Further, this give, if you have a good system, if you have a good process, it gives a certain element of confidence to your investors, your stakeholders, your shareholders. And it also facilitates, of course, end of the day, it's all everyone is doing a business. So it talks about your investment, it talks about your return on investment and your governance part. So in recent years, this IT governance has become integral and effective governance of any modern enterprises. You take any enterprises, big enterprises, of course, SME is still not able to adopt this, but businesses are increasingly dependent on IT, and because these support the critical businesses functions, and these also support the process successfully to gain a competitive advantage. These business needs to be managed effectively through a complex technology and through a pervasive thought of organization. So if you have a good, proper IT governance, then your leadership, your organizational structure, and your process will ensure the end strategies are end object of your company. So it's required to an equivalent commitment from everyone. Everyone means whenever you are designing any IT policy or IT governance, take into consideration of the last mile. So it's a typical company like a retail where you need to consider the end user, those who are working on a point of sale machine. Because in an hour he will scan hundreds of the products. So I need to consider the knowledge. I need to consider about the situation, circumstances in which he operates. I need to take into consideration to tailor-made this. Similarly, also need to consider the board level officers, CXO, CEOs, and their strategies. Everything need to be considered and need to be factored. So to conclude this, at the end, we need to evaluate on the basis of the object of your corporate, and we need to see the financial reporting so integrated, which can go beyond your simple arithmetic, simple quantitative numbers to qualitative numbers, and more importantly, how credible is your information, how credible is your process, how transparent is your system. So this will culminate into a proper corporate reporting and IT governance. And with this, I'll stop my talk here. And if any questions is there, I'll happy to take.
Thank you, sir. No, there are not much questions. I request Madam Rupanjana De to answer one question. That question regarding independent directors in your chat box.
In my chat box?
Yeah.
Just a minute.
I think I'll answer the question because that was independent. I spoke on the independent.
Yeah. Actually, it's better, yeah, Mr. Ramaswamy.
I'll answer it. The point I made was with regard to the change in the law, which now calls for the independent director to approve related party transactions. Now, I felt that that is not the correct law because of two reasons. One is that you are making the independent director do an executive function. And the second is that the independent director may not have the commercial wherewithal. Now, having said that, the question the lady has put is that I think how the independent director is intended to balance conflicting interests. I quite agree. In fact, the reason why there is a board is actually to ensure all the directors of a company, be it an independent director or a non-independent director, have to ensure that they fulfill their fiduciary responsibility. Fulfillment of the fiduciary responsibility necessarily means that they shall, consider if there is a situation of a conflict between their own interests and the company's interest, they shall consider the interests of the company to be preponderant and paramount as opposed to their own interests. So that way, the independent director is no different, and in terms of diligence and ensuring that the conflict is avoided, he has to ensure that what is done is in the interest of the company. But having said that, I feel that still the law is flawed for the reason that how do you, when there is a board which is comprised of, say, 12 directors, how do you make the independent directors who are part of the audit committee purely responsible? And that apart, it's not as if all the independent directors in the company are part of the audit committee. There could be some independent directors who are not part of the committee. So why are you trying to draw a wedge, as it were, between the body of independent directors? So these are my personal views on why I feel the law is flawed. But the conflict of interest is by itself taken care of by the fact that the audit committee was made responsible. Now, why make the independent directors alone who are part of the committee responsible? I hope I have answered this question.
Okay, no more questions. Now we come to an. She has the lady has said thank you. No more questions. Now we come to the end of the program, and it's a privilege for me to offer the formal vote of thanks to Alok Kumar Chattopadhyay, Deputy Director and Advisor F&A, Indian Chamber of Commerce. She is Anil Kumar Dubey. I think it's no more logged in. Member Regional Council, ICSI Eastern Region, Dr. Devashish Mundi, Senior Director, Institute of Cost Accountants of India. FCS Rupanjana Dev, Practicing Company Secretary and Independent Director in many organizations. CS Ramaswamy Kalidas, Partner BNP and Associates, and Mr. G. R. Srikanth, Head Legal Spencer's Retail Limited. Thank you, sirs. Thank you. Look forward to the next program.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks to all my fellow speakers.
Thank you, madam. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening.